Let me begin with a difficult question. Why do children still die from poverty in a land that is rich with resources? Why do communities remain poor even when development projects are everywhere? And why does injustice continue even in societies that profess faith? These questions have accompanied the mission of the Church for many years, and they remain with us today. Dear Father Leo, and my dear Columban brothers and sisters, partners in mission, allow me first to express my deep gratitude to the Columban missionaries who have served the Filipino people for many decades. Many of you have walked with communities in some of the most difficult moments of our history, among farmers struggling for land, workers seeking dignity, indigenous peoples defending their ancestral domains, and families trying to survive amid poverty and injustice. Your missionary presence helped many of us in the local church understand that the gospel cannot remain distant from the suffering of the poor. It must be lived where the wounds of society are most visible. In many ways, the prophetic witness of Columban missionaries helped shape the social conscience of the church in Negros and across the Philippines. Today we face new forms of injustice, corruption, ecological destruction, deepening inequality, and systems that often exclude the poor. But the missionary question remains the same. How do we live the gospel in the midst of these realities? Allow me to begin with a memory from my childhood that continues to shape how I understand that question. I grew up in a place where the earth shook several times a day, not because of earthquakes, but because of dynamite explosions from the copper mines in Sipalay in southern Negros Occidental. As children, we became used to it. When the ground trembled, we would pause for a moment and then continue playing. But later in life, I realized something deeper. Those explosions were not only breaking rocks, they were reminders of the complicated relationship between wealth and poverty, land and livelihood, development and justice. It was in this environment that I encountered the witness of missionaries. Among the many Columban missionaries who deeply influenced many of us in Negros, let me just mention two. You know them already, and I need not introduce them. They were Father Brian Gore and Father Neil O'Brien. Their experiences were captured in books that shaped how many of us understood the struggles of our island. Father Neil O'Brien, as you know, wrote Island of Tears, Island of Hope, Revolution from the Heart. The subtitle of that first book was striking, Living the Gospel in a Revolutionary Situation. The story of Father Brian Gore was narrated in the book Poor Man's Priest. These books I mentioned were not merely historical accounts. They were testimonies of missionaries trying to live the gospel in the midst of deep social suffering When Father Brian Gore began his ministry as a young missionary in Kabangkalan, he started observing the social realities around him. Kabangkalan was known as a prosperous town, but beneath that prosperity was disturbing inequality. A small number of wealthy families owned vast haciendas. Meanwhile, many farmers struggled to survive on very small plots of land. This reality became painfully clear in Father Brian's ministry. Nearly half of the burial masses he celebrated were for infants who died before reaching 1 year old. Again and again that he stood at the graves of babies. Eventually he began asking a troubling question: why are these children dying so young? And he realized something very important. This was not God's will. The causes were social. Poverty, malnutrition, lack of health care, and structural injustice. Father Neil O'Brien once recalled blessing the body of a dead infant brought by a very poor family. The child's body was wrapped only in crepe paper. The family could not afford proper burial clothes. In that moment, the reality of poverty became painfully clear, and it strengthened the conviction that the gospel cannot remain distant from the suffering of the poor. The church in Negros was also guided by the prophetic leadership of Bishop Antonio Y. Fortich. Bishop ordained me priest. During the social crisis of Negros, Bishop Fortich courageously spoke about the structural causes of injustice. He often quoted the Brazilian Bishop Tom Helder Camara, who said, and I quote, "When I give food to the poor, they call me a saint. When I ask why they are poor, they call me a communist." Unquote. Helping the poor is often accepted, but asking why poverty exists is far more controversial. For they are not simply poor, they are oppressed. There are systemic injustices. So Bishop Fortes believed that the gospel requires both charity and justice. Presently, when I assumed my role as chairman of the Episcopal Commission on Social Action, Justice and Peace, and President of Caritas Philippines, a journalist in Negros referred to me as Fortes Jr. When I read that, I smiled. Then I felt a little bit nervous because Bishop Fortes set a very high standard. Father Neil O'Brien once wrote something that continues to challenge us. And I quote, "Violence has a source, and that source is injustice." Unquote. If we truly want peace, we must address injustice. Today, the forms of injustice may look different, but the moral challenge remains. Corruption continues to wound our society. Public funds meant for schools disappear. Health services weaken. Infrastructure projects fail. And once again, it is the poor that suffer the most. Corruption is not only about money, it is about stolen opportunities for human dignity. In response to these realities, Caritas Philippines and our diocesan social action centers have been working to build structures of participation that promote transparency, accountability, and good governance. In our recent National Social Action General Assembly, several collaborative initiatives were identified to strengthen citizen participation and accountability. One initiative is the partnership among the Department of Public Works and Highways, the Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and the Movement for Good Governance. Through this collaboration, dioceses are encouraged to identify infrastructure projects of concern in their areas, like roads, bridges, flood control systems, or public buildings. The purpose is not confrontation, but constructive engagement. Dioceses may request dialogue with the regional offices of the Department of Public Works and Highways, together with civil society groups and volunteer engineers, so that project information can be clarified and transparency strengthened. Another collaboration is our developing partnership with the Department of Social Welfare and Development. Through this partnership, national and regional officers meet with diocesan social action leaders to coordinate programs that support vulnerable communities and ensure that social protection initiatives reach those most in need. We are also supporting Project Zacchaeus, an initiative that promotes reforms toward ethical political leadership, including advocacy related to the anti-dynasty bill. And we shall do this with other government agencies as well. All these initiatives share one important goal: to transform the spirit of people's power from a moment in history into a culture of participation in everyday governance, not only during moments of protest, but through sustained engagement where communities help monitor programs, raise questions, and contribute to solutions. In many ways, this is also what synodality means in the social sphere. Just as the church walks together through listening, dialogue, and shared discernment, society must also learn to walk together in building systems that serve the common good. One reason corruption survives is what we might call tolerated evils. Small irregularities people slowly begin to accept. We hear people say, ganyan talaga ang sistema. Sanay na kami. But tolerated evils rarely begin with large acts of corruption. They often begin with small compromises. And when these compromises multiply, a culture of wrongdoing slowly becomes normal. Kanya na talaga. In the Visayas, there is a beautiful word, hayuma. Among fisher folk, hayuma refers to the careful work of mending a fishing net. Because if even one hole remains, the fish escape. Corruption creates many holes in the net of society, and what escapes are the resources meant for the people. Hayuma reminds us that repairing society requires patience, courage, and collective effort. And then from Africa comes another powerful word, Ubuntu. I am because we are. When injustice harms one part of the community, the whole community is wounded. Justice is never a private responsibility. Missionaries often stand where the wounds of society become visible among farmers, fisherfolk, indigenous communities, and families struggling for dignity. In these places, the gospel is proclaimed not only with words, it is proclaimed through presence, listening, and solidarity. Pope Francis reminds us, and I quote, each day we have to decide whether to be good Samaritans or indifferent bystanders, unquote. Allow me to return to one image I mentioned at the beginning, the image of that infant wrapped only in crepe paper, a grieving mother, a grieving father, and the haunting question, why must this happen? That question continues to challenge the church today. Not only how do we help the poor, but also why are they poor? Allow me to end with a simple story from our fisher folk. One evening, fishermen returned from the sea with a very small catch. As they pulled the net onto the sand, they saw many small holes. One fisherman said, "These holes are small, maybe they do not matter." But the oldest fisherman shook his head and he said, "Every fish that escaped today passed through a hole we failed to repair yesterday." I repeat, every fish that escaped today passed through a hole we failed to repair yesterday. Then he added quietly, "If we want tomorrow's catch to be better, we must mend the net tonight." We must mend the net tonight. In our society today, corruption and injustice create many holes in the net of our nation. The work of mission is not only to preach the gospel, it is also to help mend the torn nets of society, one knot of justice at a time, one act of courage at a time, one community at a time. Thank you very much. May God bless your gathering and your mission, our mission. Daghang salamat.